Hi, welcome to Studio 14. I'm Kim Newcomer with the City of Fort Collins. Well, you might not know it, but October is Traffic Safety Awareness Month. And if you're like me, you've been known to maybe break the rules a little bit. Talk on your cell phone while you're driving, have a snack, try and discipline the kids in the back seat. Well, all of those things, although they might be time savers, really are a distraction to driving. And we're going to learn a little bit more about not only distracted driving, but the entire landscape of traffic safety with Joe Olson, our city traffic engineer. Joe, thanks for being here today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Well, okay, so it's Traffic Safety Awareness Month, but really it's just a good excuse to talk about safe driving habits. Tell me a little bit about what are some of the things that you see as our city traffic engineer as sort of common violations of common sense, let's put it that way, or what are some of the more frequent traffic crashes that we see here?
Yeah, well, what we do in traffic operations, or one of the things that we do, is we get a copy of all the traffic crash reports from the police department, and then we put them into a database, classify them by type, look at different trends and things like that. And so we've spent a lot of time looking at crashes and trying to figure out, what kind of messages can we get out to the community that would help people try to prevent crashes.
And we see that it's not just the usual suspects. Of course, there is the distracted driving, there is some trends. So tell us about sort of what you've seen as some commonalities among these crashes.
One of the, and you've hit on it, one of the overarching themes that we see when we're looking at the crashes is that distracted driving piece. The vast majority of crashes at least have some component of distraction involved with them because people are not paying attention when they're driving. They think driving is, only secondary to what they really want to be doing. And we do see a lot of crashes related to that.
I've heard you say that driving is a complicated task. And I just think that is so well put in that, in particular, as we get older, we take for granted how, we drive almost by habit as opposed to truly being present and paying attention.
Yeah, and maybe a better way to put it is good driving is a complicated task. If you're really focusing on what you're doing, there's a lot of things that you can do to prevent, the typical types of crashes that we see. But if you're not paying attention, you're lost before you start because you can't do the kinds of things you'd need to do to avoid crashes if you're not paying attention.
Right. I remember going to driver's ed. First of all, I remember being scared to death by some of the things that they showed you in terms of traffic crashes, so very effective. But I also can remember the idea of defensive driving. And I think that's exactly what you're referring to. And, not to sort of scale it down to something that's simplistic, but it really is, you can sort of, the more present you are, the more you can anticipate other people's behaviors.
Yeah, I think it is defensive driving. I think I'd also maybe, say it's strategic driving. Again, having the knowledge to know what kind of crashes are happening can help you know the kind of steps that you would take to avoid them. When we start looking at specifics of crashes, we really see about 5 types of crashes that cause most of the serious injuries in Fort Collins. We have the rear end crashes, which we all know what those are.
Right.
2 cars going in the same direction, one stops suddenly and somebody hits them from behind. We have the typical right angle or T-bone crashes that we see at intersections. We have another type of intersection crash that's fairly common, what we call an approach turn crash or a left turn crash. It's where somebody's waiting to make their left turn, yielding to oncoming traffic, and turn in front of somebody for one reason or another. And then we have our pedestrian crashes and our bicycle crashes. Those are kind of the big 5 types of crashes that we have in town that tend to cause the most injuries.
So, let's touch on some of those. In particular, I'm thinking about this left turn crash because I always think there's confusion around, when are you allowed to sneak out into the intersection? When do you need to wait and, wait for the next green arrow? Sort of what are the traffic laws and what should people be doing to avoid that crash?
That's a good question, and you're kind of going in the right direction with it because most of those crashes that we see, those approach turn crashes, do happen at signalized intersections.
Okay.
And what happens is somebody's waiting on the green light to turn left, and it's not when the arrow is on, it's after the arrow is off, and so you're just waiting on the green ball and you have to yield to oncoming traffic. And what we see happen a lot of times is confusion at the end of the light when the light goes from green to yellow. And people have already pulled up into the intersection or are waiting to turn left, the light goes yellow, and they don't know what to do.
Right.
And so everybody needs to know that the law related to a yellow light is basically that all the light is a warning that the light's about to turn red. There's nothing that says you can't enter an intersection on a yellow light. There's nothing that says you can't be in an intersection on a yellow light. And so, I think a lot of times people kind of panic and think, oh,
Right.
I'm going to be in trouble because the light's going to turn red. I need to go.
Right, like
But-
I need to be out of the intersection before the light turns
Right,
red.
but the oncoming traffic can legally enter on the yellow. And so
Oh.
if you're that driver waiting there to turn left and there's somebody coming, whether the light goes yellow or even red, and we can talk about that too in a minute, you have to wait and make sure that oncoming traffic is going to stop, because they don't always stop. And again, they don't have to stop when the light is yellow. And as we all know, sometimes they don't stop when the light is red. And so as
And
that
in fact,
left,
sometimes they speed up to catch the yellow.
exactly. And so,
Not that I would ever do that.
a good tip for people is if you're making that left turn at a signalized intersection and you've pulled up into the intersection and the light turns yellow, you can wait there legally as long as it takes for you to know that everybody oncoming is going to stop. So even if the light turns red and people say, well, you're not supposed to be in an intersection on a red light. Well, the law is you can't enter an intersection on a red light. So if you're already in the intersection, even if the light turns red, everybody has to wait for you to make sure everybody's going to stop and finish your turn before
Okay.
you do that. And that's completely legal, and it's obviously the safe way to do it.
Yeah, that's good to know, because I know that I've even been stuck in those situations, and this is probably says something about my personality. I feel bad making the cross traffic wait, but truly sometimes all you can do is wait for the light to turn red and then get out of there.
Right. And a green light isn't a green light to go. I mean, the green light says you can go, provided everybody who's already legally using the intersection has gone.
Has gotten
And
out of the
so, and I mean, more practically, we don't see crashes involving people waiting to turn left and cross street traffic who gets the green light. We just don't see those, but we do see those, where the oncoming traffic runs through on the yellow or the red. And so, again, the safest way to do it is just to make absolutely sure that oncoming traffic is stopped before you complete your left turn.
You mentioned two other crashes, pedestrian and bicycle. Obviously, a huge bike town here in Fort Collins. Some really relatively recent and heartbreaking stories about car-bike accidents. What are you seeing in terms of trends for those type of situations?
The most common type of bike crash we see in town here involves, again, at intersections. About 80% of our bike crashes happen at intersections. And so we see somebody in a car pulling up to a stop sign or a signal, a lot of times making a right turn. And so they're looking to their left, like this.
Right.
And a bike coming the wrong way, riding against traffic, either on the street or more often on the sidewalk, goes right out, into the side of that car.
This is something,
the car
yeah.
pulls up and hits them. And so, what we advise bicyclists, and we hear this a lot. We hear people say, well, I want to see the person that might hit me. And so, I'm going to ride against traffic so I can see that person coming at me and avoid them if necessary. But again, what they don't remember when they're thinking like that is that 80% of the crashes happen at intersections. And at an intersection, you're in a position where people aren't ever going to see you, or very rarely going to see you, because again, if they're turning right, they're only looking left and you're to their right. And so I understand the idea we want to be able to see whoever's going to hit us, but when we look at the data, the riding against traffic, even on the sidewalk, tends to be a contributing factor in a lot more crashes than just somebody just pulling over and hitting a bicyclist going on a straight stretch of road.
I remember you telling me this last year, which is, again, it is safer to ride with traffic in the bike lane or even just in the road with traffic on the street than it is to ride against traffic on the sidewalk, just because of that reason. And that has stuck with me completely, because I know, I have two kids and always throw them in the back. You feel safer on the sidewalk, but it's not from corner to corner. It's the intersection that really provides that struggle.
Right, and a lot of our streets, it's not just the public street intersections, it's the driveways along there. And so, you could have, on a block, you could have multiple conflict points because of all the driveways and people coming in and out. And most people, when they're entering a street, they have to pull out far enough to see traffic. And so they're pulling, across the sidewalk. And so if you're coming down the sidewalk, at bike speeds, 10 to 15 miles per hour even, you can't stop on a dime, and it's different than walking speed. And they can't avoid you, and you often can't avoid them. And so, if you're riding on the sidewalk, you really need to be aware of those driveways and really take it slow.
So we've talked about some specific crashes and what people should be aware of. Let's also talk about sort of general themes. I think one of the items in the report does talk about distracted driving. And, you and I have had this conversation where, the term is so common now, distracted driving, that, you worry that people don't even hear it anymore, or that they don't equate it to truly what it is. So, for example, when I hear distracted driving, I always think, oh, it's just someone texting while they drive. Like, well, I don't do that. I don't text and drive, which, by the way, is illegal now. But I don't text and drive. But distracted driving is also trying to stop your kids from fighting in the back, or, looking for a pen as you feel like you need to, I don't know, you're pulling up to the bank window, those type of things.
Right.
Really, it spans a lot more than just your cell phone.
It does, and cell phones are kind of the poster boy for distracted driving, with good reason. But when they do research on it, it's just what you said. They find a whole bunch of things. They dropped a CD on the floor, and so they went and tried to get it. They're dealing with their kids in the back seat. They're adjusting the radio. They're adjusting the heat or the air conditioning. All those things. There's a lot of things. GPS devices now are a big one. We see a lot of people punching the buttons on the thing on their window.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, again, reading a lot of those crash reports, you'd be surprised at some of the things that we.
Yeah, I probably don't want to know.
You probably don't, and I'm surprised that people will
it's a family program.
They'll even admit to, what they were doing.
No,
so
it is true.
But there's a lot of different things going on that really shouldn't be when you're driving.
Really shouldn't be. Other items within the report that I found surprising was, again, people still drinking and driving. I mean, it goes without saying that you should not be doing that, and yet that is a contributing factor to the accidents we have here in Fort Collins.
It is. And another type of, the sixth type of crash that we tend to see causing, some of the serious injury crashes in town are what we call fixed object crashes, which are basically people running off the road and hitting signs, trees, fences, curbs, walls, whatever they do. And the vast majority of those tend to be alcohol related. And so, when we talk about tips to avoid fixed object crashes, it's don't drink and drive.
Yeah.
It's just that simple.
Simple.
Yeah.
And then the third sort of overall piece of that is really looking at teen drivers or young drivers. And if I understood it right, they're more likely to have an accident per se than an adult driver.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not anything that's unique to Fort Collins. Any of us who have teenagers know their insurance rates are really high. And when we look at the data, it's pretty obvious why that is, because teen drivers are way overrepresented in crashes. Considering the number of licensed drivers and the number of crashes that they're in, they're about 5 times more likely than you'd expect to be in a crash. And even the next group up, the 20 to 24-year-old drivers are also overrepresented. And speaking of alcohol, one of the things that we were surprised to discover is that teen drivers were actually overrepresented in alcohol-related crashes as well.
Wow.
Which, when you consider they're not even legal drinking age, that certainly raises a flag that something's going on, and that might be something as a community that we might want to be trying to figure out a way to deal with.
Well, I think that brings up a good point is, again, the city doesn't work in this vacuum of we find this data and we shall fix it through traffic engineering, although I want to talk about some of the things we can do as a city. The bigger picture is just that. The analysis of this data really can tell us a little something about our community as a whole, and then how do we as a community work on some of those issues.
Yeah, that's what we hope to do. And again, when we talk about our traffic safety program or our approach to traffic safety, we talk about the 3 E's, engineering, education, and enforcement. And we feel like, one of the things that we really want to get out with this information is that education piece. And hence that's what we've been trying to do, is get this message out to the community with Traffic Safety Awareness Month and so on. We've also put a bunch of information on our website, which is, it's www.fcgov.com/traffic. If you go there, we've got a whole bunch of different traffic safety type things on there that people might be interested in seeing.
Definitely. And I will say, not necessarily a data person myself, but I found the report really interesting. And again, you can see a little bit of yourself and your own behaviors and your community right there in black and white. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I am kind of a data person, so I'm probably biased.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to take your word for it. Take my word. No.
We've tried to make it, less data and more, tips on
Right.
what you can do to avoid crashes. So hopefully there's something on there for everybody. And
Absolutely.
if people like data, it's there too, but there's some other stuff as well.
Great. Well, we've been talking a lot about sort of personal responsibility, what residents should be thinking about, what they should be doing, some of the things they should be aware of when out driving in Fort Collins. But there's also this engineering approach, one of the E's that you spoke of, which is what the city can do. So tell me about some of the changes that we've made or some of the technologies we're going to test out to try and make our roads safer.
Well, there's a couple different approaches that we're doing, and it's all being informed by this data that we've got. In addition to looking at kind of the citywide crash trends and things, we're also working to identify specific locations where we have an unusually high number of crashes. And then on one hand, we're trying to do what I would call like low cost safety improvements, things that we can do fairly quickly and fairly inexpensively to try to deal with situations. And then there's also, more of the capital project type things that we work with the engineering department on, incorporating, the safety data into, again, informing their decisions on what kind of capital projects they're going to be doing.
Right. So not to put you on the spot, but can you remember some of the maybe high problem or high traffic accident areas in the report?
Yeah, I can. Actually one that was really interesting and kind of surprising, when we were looking at red light running locations, the number one red light running location in town was the intersection of Mulberry and Mason. And we all kind of scratched our heads, and they were almost all eastbound. Okay. And so, we went out and did a field visit not too long ago. And once we did the field visit, it was pretty obvious what was going on. If you looked, the trees there had overgrown, and you literally almost couldn't see the traffic signal there.
Wow.
And so we worked with forestry, and the trees are now trimmed up. We had smaller signal heads up there. We put up larger signal heads with back plates to try to draw out the signals. And again, between that and the trees, we would really hope that, that was a pretty low cost thing to do.
Yeah.
And it should have a major, impact on the crashes that we've been seeing there. So a high benefit to cost ratio.
Sure. So how often are we measuring that? I mean, I know this data comes in sort of throughout the year, but how will that before and after analysis take place?
Well, we try to use about 3 years of before data, of crash data, because again, crashes are random to some extent, and so you kind of want to make sure that there's a consistent pattern of crashes before you go and spend a bunch of money, especially to do something. And so, we'll tend to look at 3 years before versus 3 years after to try to make sure that we're getting a true picture of what's going on there.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense because, they call them accidents for a reason. It's, a little bit of fate involved, perhaps.
Right.
One of the safety suggestions that often comes up is adding a traffic signal. And I know I've heard folks say, I can't make this left turn out of my neighborhood. We need a traffic signal. That doesn't automatically equate to safety.
No, it doesn't. In fact, if you look at some of that big picture data, about I think it's 43% of all our crashes occur at signalized intersections, even though they're a small percentage of our total intersections. And so it's a misnomer that a traffic signal is always a safety improvement.
Right.
To us, they're like any other tool that in some situations they make sense to improve safety. In other locations, they probably don't because they tend to reduce the likelihood of certain types of crashes, particularly those right angle crashes or T-bones that we talked about, but they tend to increase the risk for rear end crashes and also left turn crashes, the approach turns.
Okay.
And so they aren't a cure-all.
Balance.
It's a balance. And when we look at an intersection, we weigh all of those factors and try to make the right decision on what the appropriate traffic control would be to use. And so.
Well, I'm glad you're here also because I wanted to ask you about the bike box and how that's working out. And I think that was an attempt to sort of minimize that right hook bike car accident. There's now a bike box at, can't quite remember the intersection.
Shields and Plum.
Shields and Plum.
On Plum, they're eastbound, going towards the university.
So how's that working out?
Well, I should maybe explain that right hook thing a little bit because that's probably our number two, not probably, it is our number two type of bicycle crash in town. We talked about the wrong way riding. The other ones we see typically involve somebody riding the right way, but they're coming up like this and a motorist turns right in front of them, hence the term right hook. And so one of the things that's being tried around the country is this bike box idea, which actually gives a space up in front of cars for the bikes to pull up in front of them over to the left so that they're not in that zone where they tend to get hooked.
Right.
And so
they're much more visible. They're actually in front of the cars, so you can't miss them.
Right. And so that's the idea with it. It's actually an experimental device. We had to get permission from the Federal Highway Administration to use that and put it on the street because it's not a approved device. And as part of that, we have to do like a before and after assessment of that so that we can, be part of the solution as we provide input to the feds,
Sure.
that then they can take that with some of the other communities that are doing that and weigh it all and see, is this something that we really should be allowing people to do or not? And so it's not clear cut. There's some different things involved with the bike box that it might make some things better, but it might make some things worse. And so we've been doing, we did like 3 weeks of videotape of before data.
Oh, really?
And we're getting a bunch of after data now, and we're going to compare conflicts and things like that to see what it does.
It'd be really interesting to hear back from you when you have that information.
Yeah, again, for a data guy, that's
this is heaven on earth.
Yeah.
One more sort of traffic safety tool that I wanted to ask you about, and that is the flashing yellow arrow. And tell us about that and what that's designed to address.
Well, again, it starts to speak to those left turn crashes again. And one of the things that researchers nationally, again, have found is that some drivers are confused by what the green ball means. The green arrow means you can go.
Right.
But sometimes people, when they see a green ball, they also just, green means go, and they were turning in front of people. And so and causing those left turn crashes. And so, long story short, again, the Federal Highway Administration did a bunch of research and came up with this solution, which is the flashing yellow arrow, which they feel has a more clear message as to, you can turn, but you have to turn with caution after yielding.
Right.
Versus green means go, it's flashing yellow, which, universally means caution.
Right.
And so that's kind of the idea behind it. In a more technical sense, it allows us to do some things differently at intersections than we could do before. For example, another intersection that we've done one of these low-cost safety improvements at is College and Monroe, which is the intersection just north of Horsetooth on College.
Yep.
And what we were seeing happening is southbound traffic, and there's 3 lanes on College there, and we were seeing southbound traffic on College in the inside 2 lanes, in the inside through lane and the middle lane, backing up through Monroe. And then you'd have somebody in the other direction on College northbound wanting to make a left turn.
Oh.
And the people waiting there would say, go on, we're waiting.
And then someone in
and
that
they'd
third
turn,
lane.
but then they were forgetting that third lane and they were getting hit. And so we looked at those and they were almost all, by time of day in the afternoons on weekdays type of a thing. And so we installed the flashing yellow arrow there, which we can still allow the permissive left turns at certain times of day, but what we're doing now, and this is what it allows us to do, is we go to protected only left turns in the afternoon. And so we change how the left turns work by time of day. With the old standard 5-section doghouse, that's what we call them, left turn signals with the green and then the green and yellow arrow over here.
traffic term today.
Yeah. We weren't really able to do that. Those were kind of, you did it one way and you did it that way all the time. But with this flashing yellow arrow and the way the signal lights are configured, we can do it protected only at times a day and then permissive or protected permissive at times a day. So hopefully that'll be a safety improvement as well.
And it's really cool to hear about, not only gathering the data, but figuring out what to do with the findings. It's just such a great tangible example of using this information to make tangible changes, again, on the engineering side, which is where the city has some of that control. And then hopefully as community members, we can have that same process, right? Again, you learn about sort of those more common traffic accidents and you can just be a little bit more aware. It's really interesting.
Right. Well, we hope it's interesting and we hope it's valuable. We hope the things that we're doing are valuable. And that's the other part of having this data, is it allows us to actually use, that information as performance measures. So we can actually say, we were successful or we weren't with something that we tried, so that we know, we learned some things. And we also are able to be able to say, this was a good use of money or not. Right. And so, that's kind of what we want to use it as well as a performance measure, so we can kind of track how successful we're being with this stuff.
That's great. Well, again, that website is fcgov.com/traffic. Joe, I know you've been on, I keep teasing you, a public relations whirlwind this month with talking to different groups and sharing the information in this report. I'm going to say that if folks are interested, they should contact you and the traffic department, and I'm sure there's someone in your office that would love to come out and share this data and share the findings and encourage people to be aware and be 100% committed to their driving task.
Yeah, it'd be great. I mean, we actually have a presentation prepared that we've been going around and talking to interested groups about. So if anybody's interested in that, we'd be happy to do it and get into some of the more details than we've been able to today.
Great. Well, Joe Olson, our city traffic engineer, thank you so much for being here. Again, really interesting information on fcgov.com/traffic, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Absolutely. And thank you all for watching. This has been Studio 14. I'm Kim Newcomer with the City of Fort Collins. We'll see you next time.